Actually, while I have a minute, I'd like to ask everyone who's comfortable to please take off your shoes and come join me at the front. I will be sitting here. I will not be standing. We had meetings when we were in India. That's what I'll be talking about today as our trip in India, where we would all come and sit in a circle. We would sit cross-legged with our shoes off, and we would talk to one another. Every single person was introduced in the room. It didn't matter if there was 10 people. It didn't matter if there was 30 people. We would all sit together and without our shoes on. I apologize that I'm on this step. Okay, thank you. So you've probably all heard stories countless times about privilege and how privileged people from developed countries travel to underdeveloped countries or developing countries. And they come back and their lives are changed and they have eye-opening experiences and they feel as though they can change the world or they're inspired enough to change the world. And I'm not going to say that my experience was any different. I valued my time in India more than my 3 years of undergrad, that's for sure. But I did come back with that same perspective. I came back with my eyes open. So today I'd like to talk to you about privilege, the privilege I saw there. But I'm not here to talk to you about my own privilege. I'm here to talk to you about Indian privilege and how we're doing it wrong here. So I went with Ravina and Kaylin to India for 3 months. We landed in New Delhi on September 18th, and we traveled around working with different NGO groups. My projects focused on nonviolence and the application of Gandhian philosophy, but for these studies, I specifically focused on privilege and how it's viewed from an outsider's perspective. The best way to start would be to start with our experience with Ravina's grandmother. Her name is, well, we called her Dadi. That's what we say in Indian, or in Hindi. So Dadi showed us the most kindness that I have ever experienced in a family setting. Dadi opened her home to us and allowed us to stay there, not only in a compound for the entire duration of our stay, but also we visited Ravina's other grandmother, Nani. These women embraced us like they were our own family. They coached us, they gave us life advice, and they supported us in our work. The family bonds that we witnessed there were something like we don't share here in Canada. I grew up in a small neighborhood, so I can say that I do remember the days where everyone in the neighborhood would help one another. We all played in the alley together. We were very close-knit, but this is a part of their culture. They have strong family bonds that govern their way of life every single day. And I can tell you, I miss that. Here in Canada, it is more common for people to be reserved and to individuate their time. So in that sense, we are underprivileged. Within the villages, we discovered a number of different self-help groups where women were working with one another on a grassroots level to better their lives, their daily lives, and the lives of the people around them. So this meant domestic abuse, this meant livelihood programs, and this also meant what was most interesting to see was these livelihood projects in action. They made jewelry, they made cloth, they painted, they raised goats and chickens and sold produce on markets, and very small trolleys in overcrowded markets that are very hard to navigate. It is these women who I'd like to focus on for the rest of my talk. The women of rural India, considered tribals by the brutish vocabulary of colonialism, work every day to make living conditions better. The women meet once a month or once every 2 weeks, depending on how often they need that, to discuss issues that are affecting the community. The most common problem was the source of livelihood, and work projects were born from these meetings. They were in control of their livelihood in the sense that they chose the projects that they were going to work on. They chose what would work for them. So in some cases, you can't always raise cows or goats or chickens. And so that's where in the more urban and developed areas. So they would access resources and get grants and programs and loans not from the government and not from banks, but from one another. And they had community funds in which they would raise these monies, and that community fund was used towards these projects, as opposed to what we here in Canada do, where we have to go to banks and are in debt and pay interest. So, in cases of, the most interesting, I'd say, was in cases of interpersonal violence and domestic abuse, the women would go in and speak to the family in question. So usually the aggressing party was a male member of the family. I'm not trying to be sexist or discriminate in any way. That was just the most common. It was an abusive family member, usually alcoholic, who would be abusing these women. To solve these problems here in Canada, we go to self-help groups. We have people referred to get medication. We take them to the hospital, or we, in the most dire cases, involve the police. In India, in the villages of Orissa and Mayurpanj, they work as a group in their community in these meetings. Mahila Shanti Sena is one of the groups that we work with. They go in and speak to the man or the woman, because the women who were targeted in society were thought to be witches. So it was either an aggressive male or women who was thought to be too destructive to the community and their way of life. They would go in and speak to them and give them a warning and offer them the choice to either change their ways of behavior or they'd be punished. And the punishment was a fine paid into the community. That doesn't seem like much of a punishment here, but money is very valuable there, so they couldn't spare any penny. The strong bond between these women is another thing I'd like to talk about. The women, after one of our meetings, as night was setting in, we had just finished discussing for, I think it was close to 2 hours. It was one of the longer meetings, and all the women came outside of the building, a very one-room schoolhouse where they had all their functions. That was the only cement pad they had in the village. And we sat around. After sitting around just like this, we stood up and we walked outside, and the women joined arms. And they began to sing. And someone had a drum to keep the beat. And all of a sudden, these women started dancing. And we were arm in arm, swaying back and forth, and dancing, and moving in a very strange circular line dance that I don't think we could ever replicate. But that bond, these women singing, they were songs that they had written themselves. It was their own voices, and the whole night was loud with that sound. I'll never forget that. We do have groups here in Hamilton that are working on great projects, like Nancy's already mentioned. A few that I'd like to mention are Food Not Bombs and Habitat for Humanities, because those are the only two that I've worked with personally. I know there's a lot of good work being done, but the social networking and the bonding that these women had was unique in the sense that it reminded me of my childhood, to an abstract way of connecting to people in comparison to Twitter or Facebook or Tumblr that we use more commonly today. I propose we should get back to these grassroots levels of communication to develop our interpersonal relationships and realize the privilege we really have in society. Thank you. I guess if there's any questions.
Sorry.
Thank you.
How did the community groups like work with receive you as a performer?
That was very interesting. We were often treated as very privileged, so that we were either, in some cases, we were treated very poorly, and we were considered less than human because we weren't men, and we were only worthy insofar as our father's position in the working world. The women who met us in the villages treated us like we were royalty. They were very excited to touch us and shake our hands and meet us and find our names and find out our names. And they greeted us every meeting they handed us that we went to. They gave us flowers when we got there. They threw rice at us for our entry, and we were treated as honored guests. So we were in a position of privilege and very well received.
Do you ever want to go back?
I'd love to do my master's, part of my master's degree, because this was for an undergraduate course, internship. I would love to do part of my master's in India.
Okay, thank you very much.